Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have Dan Burkland, President of Five9 Solutions, share his perspective on the digital transformation and customer experience in the contact center. Some housekeeping first. The session will be recorded, basically 40 to 45 minutes, Q&A with Dan. No slide deck, followed by your questions, which you can post in the chat window after 2:30. Up till then, the chat option will be closed and you'll also be on mute. We plan to conclude at 3-ish, and you know where the washrooms are, I'm sure. In the event you have questions after the session, or perhaps questions we could not answer because of time constraints, we will reach out to you prior to the end of next week. Our objective in the session is to share Dan's experience on, firstly, some of the decisions you may be considering with upgrading, expanding, or deploying a contact center. Secondly, why the contact center is becoming increasingly more important and how we can optimize that customer experience. And lastly, what some of the economic and operational benefits are. By way of introductions, my name is Calven Iwata, CEO of Unity Connected. We design, build, and support communication solutions. Firstly, a brief background on Five9. They launched 20 years ago to deliver and support contact center software via the cloud. Today, they continue to be focused and committed to exclusively provide contact center as a service via cloud, which, as we know, is CCaaS. They are US-based, global footprint, publicly traded on NASDAQ. They process 7 billion call center minutes a year. They have 2,000 plus customers comprising 200,000 contact center seats. Their organic growth is 30% year over year. They completed 2 acquisitions in 2020, strengthening their position in artificial intelligence and machine learning. They are recognized and ranked by Forrester and Gartner, and recently ranked #1 by Gartner based on CCaaS capabilities and use cases. And they have an impressive market cap of US $12 billion. So a bit about Dan Burkland. Dan joined Five9 as SVP Enterprise Sales 12 years ago and has been the company's president for the past 4+ years. Prior to Five9, Dan was SVP Sales at Transair Communications, and he also held management positions at IP Unity, Cisco, and Geotel. All in all, he has 30 years of contact center experience. Dan, despite Canada's inhospitable border regulations and our continued deep anxiety that the Stanley Cup continues to make its temporary home in Tampa, we do nevertheless extend a very warm virtual welcome to you and your team today. Folks, please meet Dan Burkland. Dan?
Calvin, well, thank you very much for that warm introduction and thorough overview. Greatly appreciate that. And first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for allowing us to participate in this session today. And thank you in big part to our partnership. You know, when I look across the landscape, and as you mentioned, our company is growing globally, Unity Connected has really helped put us on the map in the Canadian market, and has been recognized as our #1 channel partner in Canada this last year. And so we're very pleased with the partnership. Can't thank you and your teams enough for helping establish our presence and bring our solutions to your customers, and creating a real whole new reimagined customer experience for those folks. So first, I want to say thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, and we're from my standpoint more than happy to provide that Stanley Cup back where it belongs, right? Anytime there's a Stanley Cup awarded to the warm weather cities down in the Sun Belt of the U.S., I feel a little guilty about that. So I think you guys have earned it there north of the border, and would look forward to getting that back to you.
Thank you for your kind words. We weren't expecting a plug, but thank you anyways. Let's get started with some questions for you, Dan. Dan, I understand that roughly 30% of Five9 sales are derived internationally, and that Canada is a meaningful portion of your international sales. Can you walk us through the deliberate steps Five9 has taken to address Canadian customers' concerns regarding things like data sovereignty, privacy laws, French language requirements, and so on?
Yep. Yeah, great question. So right along those lines, we recognized several years ago that the Canadian market was ripe and a great opportunity for Five9. So we set out on our journey to make sure that we adhered to those data sovereignty and restrictions and making sure the data stays there, call recordings stay there. And in order to do that, we needed to build full data centers within Canada and make sure that everything resides and stays within Canada in its own isolated environment, not accessible by the US or the US resources. So we set out on that journey and did that, and we launched it because many customers have that adherence requirement and wanted to make sure that they were operating in a fully compliant fashion. Some folks were willing and able to have calls recorded and move traffic across the border, while others were very adamant that we adhere to those standards. So we've done that. We've built our data centers in. We had customers even prior to the data center launch in Canada that did operate off of our U.S. centers, and we created the French Canadian language prompts and throughout the entire system end to end for some rather large early adopters of our solution. Gosh, probably 6-7 years ago is when we launched our French Canadian language pack, and then as we added our data centers into Canada, it's given us that resiliency and also not having to move voice traffic across the border, which can be expensive as well.
Thank you. Thank you for that consideration. We appreciate it. We have a lot of customers that ask a lot of those questions, and traversing the borders is a concern for confidential data. So appreciate that. Absolutely. Let's assume that a customer has decided to upgrade, expand, or deploy a contact center and next must choose between on-premise or cloud delivered. What are the common reasons customers tell you why they favor cloud?
Yeah, there's several, and a lot of this is education because they're not sure if and why they would prefer cloud. And so it's up to us to really help educate. As you mentioned at the outset, I've been in and around this space for 30 years. And one thing that has been prevalent throughout the last couple decades is companies that were highly distributed workforces, and they had contact centers in multiple locations. There's technology that you can implement there, but it really creates silos, right? Silos of technology. You've got to put the servers on the premises in a particular building, if you will. And it typically was good at serving those resources and the calls that came into that building from the carriers. And then you duplicate that technology stack in multiple locations. And rarely is the networking software capable of truly building a virtual contact center where you get the economies of scale of being able to take an inbound call to an enterprise and being able to then distribute it to the most effective, highest skilled agent who's currently available and deliver the voice call and also deliver the pertinent data to allow them to interact with that customer most effectively. There was the big challenge, right? Because you got to move the call to the right location, you got to move the data to the right location, and if you had all these silos of technology, they didn't operate as one, they operated in some cases, 10 small silos. By moving the contact center into the cloud, you create one virtual contact center where all your agent resources, regardless of location, they could be spread across 10 formal contact centers. They could be spread across small offices and now home offices. And each agent logs in independently and sets up that path. And that path allows them to then have not only the voice calls delivered to wherever they might be sitting in the world, but also have the data delivered to them in a very consistent fashion. So you create one single contact center solution and you can apply it to your resources wherever they might be. So that's the primary single impetus for why folks were beginning to move to the cloud. And then what we're discovering is once we built in the scalability, the reliability, the security for data protection, and then emulated the feature functionality. This is probably over 5 to 10 years ago, all the feature functionality that they have in their current premises-based solution. It then allowed us to show customers that you have a platform for innovation that's far easier to integrate and innovate from that cloud platform versus trying to go build, like we said earlier, oh, I've got to build this integration 10 times. I've got to make sure each one of my sets of servers are maintained, are updated, are integrated to the back office systems. Now you have one system in which to integrate with. And so that's made it much more prevalent for us to introduce some of the new technologies that we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Sounds good. And so having those resources working from anywhere, it helps to create a gene pool that is really global for contact center agents as opposed to local, which would be the case in a premise-based environment. Okay, great. We would be remiss if we did not acknowledge the past 18 months where we witnessed contact center workforces transform from traditionally centralized models into a decentralized model with remote agents. Is this evolution in your mind or a passing trend?
Yeah, no, it's certainly a change that's here to stay. And it's interesting. 20 years ago, we were talking about having home-based agents, or give them the luxury of being able to work from home. And there was always the reluctance by leaders within the contact center world that said, "Oh, I can't let my agents be remote from my supervisors. They need to walk the floor and monitor their calls and be able to track what they're doing and really validate their performance on a real-time ongoing basis." And what we found was the forcing function of the pandemic pushed people to work from home. And what was discovered throughout this process was something that was rather enlightening to contact center leadership, which was, oh, we do now have the technology where we can monitor their calls, we can monitor their desktops even, and see how they're responding to customer interactions on a real-time basis. And we can really have the visibility and control over their activities. And so the newer technology has allowed an adoption of work from home agents and really a work from anywhere flexibility, right? We now have bandwidth going to most homes and to offices where agents can choose to log in from any location. And we now have supervisor tools. Our virtual observer product allows us to observe what's happening on the calls, during the calls, listen in on the conversation so that thresholds can be alerted. Supervisors can be alerted when calls are either reaching certain thresholds, either based on time or even now based on the sentiment analysis of the real-time applications that can listen to the calls and understand when a call is going sideways and alert the supervisor to join, or at least come on and understand what's happening so they can either whisper coach to the agent, they can chat with the agent to give them advice, or even participate in the call if needed.
Sounds great. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Let's talk about the importance of the customer's experience. We read on more than one occasion Five9 referring to the contact center as the new front door to a business. We also read a McKinsey report that during the pandemic, more than 50% of customers were contemplating alternatives to their current vendors. So if the customer experience is so important, then it would make sense that optimizing that experience during that communication duration is the goal. So Dan, how important is omni or multi-channel communications, such as email, chat, text, and so on, in optimizing the interaction?
Yeah, it's extremely important. And I would talk about the omni-channel as kind of the first wave of providing your consumers with options, right? Allow them to interact in the channel that they feel most convenient or most comfortable with at that given point. Some people say, well, this given customer prefers this channel over that channel. Oftentimes, it's not the customer that prefers a single channel or a specific channel. It's based on what they're doing at that moment in time. If I'm driving down the road in my car, I'm probably going to want to use a voice interface and speak to someone via my mobile. If I'm sitting behind my PC, I may prefer to use chat. I may prefer to use email. The key there is to deliver a consistent experience, a delightful experience, regardless of the channel that the consumer chooses to interact with you on. So whatever's at the other end of those channels that they choose to interact with, it's important that that person, and I'll talk about even if there's not a person at the other end in a few minutes, but if that person has the data and the interface in front of them to be able to make that experience a delightful and thorough and be able to get the answer that the consumer's after, regardless of what channel they may have inquired on.
And which communication channels do customers prefer?
We're seeing more and more, there's a lot of factors that will play into, and it really is across different industries and even specific companies. If you're an existing customer of a company and a brand that you're used to working with, if you're able to get an immediate answer by calling in on a voice channel and getting an agent and getting your answer, that's great. People will typically, in many cases, opt for that. If I've got a very straightforward question, I don't need to speak to somebody, I may opt for a digital channel instead. What we're finding is if you're in an environment where, gee, whenever I call, I have to wait for 15 minutes just to get my answer because I have to wait in queue for a live agent. That's where you might find customers are saying, well, I'll just use a text channel or one of the digital channels to be able to get my answer because I know it's quick, it's easy, and I can get the answer right away. And as we move into these automations that I'll speak about in a moment, that's becoming extremely prevalent. Right. So when you look at the channels, it's not one channel taking over for another channel or one being a preference to another. It's about giving your customers choice. And every environment, it does have a unique split of how much voice versus how much email versus how much chat, depending on the types of questions, the complexity of those questions, and can they be handled. And now when you add in not only the text channels, but you add in the automation of self-service, or if they're straightforward questions, the system can typically find the answer and speak it back to the customer or feed it back to the customer in an automated chatbot method. So it's hard to predict. No prediction is going to fit for all companies. It's going to be different for each one. And that's what we spend time working with our clients on, which is let's set it up so that you have the choices and you'll see where people migrate to. And there's a lot of variables that will cause them to migrate to one channel over another.
Okay, sounds good. So it's important to give them choice because you want to start off with a positive experience. They don't want to be forced to a single modality channel, for example. So in terms of the average communication duration of a call or a chat or whatever, does it also vary depending on the channel, or is it safe to say that generally voice is a longer duration than a chat or email channel?
They vary. It really depends on the complexity and the detail that is needed to get the answer to the question. If I'm calling in for a very simple thing or contacting a business to find out the status of my shipment or, how do I change my password or something very straightforward and basic that's asked on a repetitive basis, that's an answer that can be given very quickly, regardless of the channel that they choose. So I think the key there is it depends. It really does depend. Again, the key is being able to have all those channel options available to the customer so the customer can choose how to interact.
Okay. Where I was going with that, we could talk about it later when we talk about financial implications, was if one of those channels it took less time to remediate an issue, then maybe you kind of migrate more to that so you have greater productivity with the agent. But we cover that in a second. So presumably CRM integrations is also important to optimizing customer experience. Can you give us some examples of the CRM platforms and other software and applications you can integrate to through APIs?
Yeah, so there's two primary technologies that are really required in any contact center, and that is a routing engine such as Five9 that will take those interactions, find the right resource, and deliver that interaction to the agent. And then the complementary piece of that is the CRM. We can deliver the interaction, either the phone call or the email, to the agent, but the agent needs to be empowered with access to all the correct and pertinent data in order to get the answer that they're being asked about. They're being asked a question because for whatever reason, the consumer couldn't get their answer either online or in another way. So they reached out to the contact center, and that agent needs to be empowered to have the information to conclude and deliver the answer to the consumer. And so the CRM is where that data typically lies. And so being able to have access to it is important. We've talked about screen pop in our industry for 20 years. And, popping the screen used to be, oh yeah, we have integration to CRM because we can do a screen pop for that agent to then work on the interface, either by a case management system or an ordering system or whatnot. But that's really just the tip of the spear, just the tip of the iceberg, if you will. We have found that trading and sharing data between what's happened in the routing engine and in the interaction engine, like Five9, And sharing that data and information with the CRM is very critical, because then you have a track record and a history of what took place in prior interactions, so that if you were to call back, Calvin, and I'm an agent and you reached out to me and I answered your call, let's say it's a voice call, to be able to look into the CRM and see all the detail of what you did over the last several interactions. It gives me, the ability to greet you in a unique way and a personalized way, and to say, oh, I see you spoke to Jake last week on Wednesday at 3:00 and you discussed X, Y, and Z. Is that why you're calling back? And it just creates a much better experience, and usually a more efficient way to get right to the point, rather than start your conversation over from scratch. So lots of tools that are available today to help with that.
And it becomes more personal, and you make a connection with the caller as well. Earlier, we referenced 2020 acquisitions. One of those acquisitions is Inference. Can you walk us through how AI and machine learning acquired through Inference will further optimize the customer interaction?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And when we talked about kind of omnichannel being phase one, or the first wave of delivering options to your consumers, what we're finding in kind of this newest wave, the wave two, is really the automation suite. And what we're delivering through both, it was the acquisition of Inference, but also through, we acquired a company called Wendoo, which is a workflow automation tool. And then delivering some of our own AI IP, and also leveraging and working closely with the likes of Google and IBM and Amazon and others. What we're able to do is deliver a suite. And I'll talk about that suite in three ways. One is delivering yet another option where customers can now choose to self-serve, right? Do I want to wait in queue and talk to an agent? If I just want to check something very straightforward, like I talked about before, I may just have the system answer the call with a virtual agent, an IVA as we refer to it. And think of it as an IVR that's, made the leapfrog approach to, we've all had speech enabled IVRs that are listening for key phrases or questions and then trying to find an answer that fits that. Well, the technology in the last 3 to 4 years has really extended itself to where voice interfaces are becoming very prevalent within our society, right? We talk to Siri, we talk to Alexa on our home devices. So customers and just us as citizens are getting more and more comfortable talking to a machine, having a voice interface. And so that's step one. Step two is we have those voice interfaces that are now very capable of understanding spoken English and being able to go fetch, understand, apply natural language understanding to that text, because we're taking the voice conversation, converting that question into text immediately in real time, and then being able to apply, think of it like a Google search. If you go on your PC and type in a question into a Google, so it's going to go find you answers on the internet and bring them back instantly. Think about the same thing. I can ask a question of an IVA, and because that's converted into English text, apply the same NLU from Google and allow it to go search all the data sources within your company and come back with an answer. I can then text to speech that answer back to the consumer. So in many cases, an IVA can just answer my question for me, and I'm done with the interaction right there. Second area of the AI and machine learning is applied to the agent. So in some cases, people will self-serve and get their problem solved and never have to speak to a human. In other cases, they may opt to speak to a human agent. And then what we're going to do is still, again, listen in on that conversation in real time, convert it into text, apply natural language understanding so we can say, aha, I hear what's being asked, rather than have the agent sit there and have a superficial conversation while they're off hunting for an answer, whether it's in the CRM or it's in an FAQ database or it's in a knowledge base. The system can go fetch the answer and bring the answers back to the agent and display them on their desktop, so that the agent can be that much more quick to answer the question, can be more intelligent, and oftentimes what we'll do is we'll pull up 3 or 4, just like Google does in a search. We'll pull up 3 or 4 potential answers, let the agent choose the answer, and then the system, the machine learning algorithm, understands how to be more and more accurate over time, because it knows, the agent chose this answer when this was the question. And so it knows then how to go fetch better answers. So we can assist the agent. We call that agent assist, AI infused agent assist. The second area can assist the agent in some of your environments where the agents spend a few minutes in post-call wrap-up, inputting case notes or putting their notes in to a system. What we can actually do, because we have a full transcript of the call, we can insert the full transcript in to that CRM automatically. It's almost like auto dispositioning the call. And then we can actually extract and pull out key summary elements and list them in the CRM. And that's why I gave that example earlier. If an agent contacts me, or if a customer contacts me and I'm the agent, and I see, aha, they spoke to Calvin last week at 3:00 on Wednesday, and they discussed A, B, and C. It's right there at my fingertips. So we can help the agent with their tasks and reduce the call time that they have to spend in wrap-up mode. We reduce the call length because we get answers to the agent more effectively and faster. And we also can reduce the wrap-up time, so you can do more with fewer agents. And then the third element is the third area of automation is where a lot of customers today still spend manual hours of their agents to follow up with customers and have that closed loop. So we can trigger workflow to say, Calvin just placed an order through the contact center. And it will, once the inventory system says, aha, it's due to ship on Tuesday, the system will go trigger an outreach to the consumer that says, thank you for your call. We appreciate your order. Our inventory system shows it's going to ship on Tuesday between 10 and 12 p.m. I then send you another reminder SMS message on Monday saying, your shipment's going to arrive tomorrow. I can send you a follow-up after it arrives to say, did you receive it okay? Everything fine? Send you a small survey. So all those manual tasks that we used to do from contact centers, we can now automate. And it gives a nice closed loop end to end to the consumer back, and even can do that survey piece to find out if they're satisfied. So those are kind of three areas of automation: the pre-call self-service, the during call helping the agent, and then the post-call responding back to the consumer.
So the obvious question would be, with all of that technology, with machine learning, AI, IVAs, IVRs, and so on and so forth, do you think there's a time where we will have no need for human interaction?
Wow, that would be remarkable. I think what we are finding in the adoption of the automation technologies is it allows companies to reimagine the customer experience that they're going to deliver. It's like, interact with us in any channel, any modality that they choose, but also be able to be more effective. You get better answers, you get self-service, you get the agent's more effective in how they interact because they have more data being delivered to them as opposed to them going and hunting for it. But the ability, what we're finding, if you put in IVAs, the best thing to do is to try them. And that's what we find, because our customers say, well, how much of my calls, what percentage of my calls am I going to deflect over to this IVA, the automated agent? And the answer is, we have no idea. It depends on so many variables. If they're used to waiting for 20 minutes in queue for an agent, more people might opt to self-serve. If they're getting their answers accurately responded to, the increase in percentage will likely go up because they got a satisfying experience in doing so. So what we find is, we know that the adoption is going to increase over time. When we look at, when we sell software to help the agents be more effective, we also provide the software for the virtual agents. And so as this trend continues, and we know that adoption rate of IVAs is going to go up and to the right, we just don't know how steep that curve is and how fast it gets, like you said, to a, do I deflect 2% of my calls to start? Do I deflect 10%, 20%? It really depends. I think what we do know is, over the next decade or so, as society becomes more accepting of digital interfaces and voice interfaces and not having to speak to live humans, you'll find that adoption curve definitely increase and accelerate. It's just, it's hard to say how fast it's going to go. But most of the new businesses that we sell into are opting in to put IVAs in place in some way, shape, or form to see if there's an adoption rate there. And it's different for every customer. It's different across different industries and depending on the types of questions you get into your contact centers.
Great, thank you for that. We spoke at length about the customer experience and the importance of optimizing that interaction, which would sensibly apply equally to for-profit and not-for-profit businesses, municipalities, government agencies, and so on. It is often difficult to measure the financial impact resulting from the customer's experience. Dan, let's try to tackle that, starting with how interactions through omni-channels such as chat and so on can enhance agent productivity, which we touched on previously. Can you share any metrics that support those productivity gains?
So the productivity gains, it's interesting. So there's been a trend within the industry of, enable your agents to interact with your customers in any channel the customer chooses. We talked about that earlier. The other challenge, though, is finding agents that are proficient and skilled to be able to handle, voice calls very effectively, as well as chats and emails and other digital channels effectively. That's a pretty skilled person. And most people either find themselves still being skilled with the gift of gab and prefer to interface with somebody in a voice conversation. And there's also agents that are effective at having 4 or 5 chat windows open at a time and being able to chat with multiple customers. And so certainly you have, and then you have your universal agents that say, I can handle any mode, any channel, but because I've got superior skill and therefore I want to be able to do so across the channels. And we still find some environments that will isolate their digital agents from their voice agents, and other environments that try to turn everyone into, the universal cross channels based on their inherent skills on products or languages or so forth. So it really does depend on the environment. To try to look at the metrics and the ROI, it is very it's one that we have to take into account in each customer to roll up the sleeves and really look at, okay, how much more efficient is your operation going to result in by adding these additional channels? And the other one that's really hard to measure is, we find in many studies, the McKinsey study actually went through this as well, which is there's a high propensity, over 50% of consumers during the pandemic were considering changing brands. And that goes kind of across the board in a variety of different environments. So, and the change in brand wasn't because of the product that they were receiving, but was because of the service experience that they were receiving. So it's not okay just to differentiate on a product anymore. You've got to differentiate and really use the customer experience as a key differentiator. And we find that was starting to become more and more prevalent about 2 to 3 years ago, when we started seeing decisions for these technologies being elevated into the C-suite of companies. And these were becoming strategic decisions because they found the loyalty is measurable when you look at your existing customers and keeping those customers satisfied and delivering an experience that will keep them loyal, because they have other avenues. They can not only switch brands, but they can also go on social media and either promote a brand or take down a brand very, very quickly, and things can spread very rapidly. And so it's become more and more important to deliver an experience that's delightful. Hard to put the metrics on that. There's various external companies that have done studies, but it really does depend from one industry to another what that impact is.
Would that apply also to IVA and IVRs in terms of trying to drill down into the economic benefits of those and how they can scale actual number of agents?
That's right, because when you look at IVAs, when you look, you can put in an IVA and have that, they don't get tired, they work 24/7, a virtual agent, and it costs, in some cases, maybe 20% of what a human agent would cost. When you start looking at labor, that's the most expensive part of any contact center. And if you can offload and deflect some of that traffic to the virtual agent, we have some companies that recently that we've signed up that have said the savings in the IVA call deflection alone more than pays for Five9. In other words, they're going to save more money by the agent reduction than they will spend on the software. So that's compelling when we start seeing ROIs that are, paying the entire system.
Our discussion so far has been mostly related to incoming communications. We should also briefly consider the financial benefits specific to outbound contact center communication. We understand Five9 processes 7 billion call center minutes a year. Dan, how can such big data and analytics be leveraged to benefit other segments of the business?
Yeah, so it can work in several ways, and I'll talk first about outbound. Proactive care or proactive outreach can be very effective. Historically, it's been mostly done with, the dialers, right? To be able to dial a list of, prospective individuals that need information or that you're soliciting information for. You've got to be careful. The countries have different laws and regulations about when you can you call mobile numbers, if it's not to solicit information, and do you have consent by that consumer to reach out to them proactively on the phone. You got to make sure that we're adhering to those different regulations. That's one step. But the other is proactive outreach and notification. I talked about before, in one way was that workflow example. After a customer interaction, I reached out and basically gave them the information as follow-up. So working with the digital channels in an outbound fashion is very, very effective. Either sending them an email, sending them chats, doing voice follow-up to just maybe do a human survey to thank them for the business and so forth. So there's lots of ways we can do outreach to be effective. But if you look at the overall, effectiveness, the outreach is one piece. And then I'm sorry, your question was more related to the second part of your question.
Let me just check. How big data and analytics, how can we leverage to benefit other aspects of the business?
Yeah, the big data and analytics is very important for us because what we're able to do is we're able to anonymize the input, meaning if you take those 7 billion minutes of voice calls, historically, those have been, in many cases, recorded and stored, and very little access to what's happened in those conversations, right? It's about, maybe for quality management or agent training, I want to go in and listen to certain calls, and mostly the information that you glean from those calls. And by the way, you can only listen to, 1 or 2%. If you have 100 agents, you got to have, if you want to listen to 10%, you got to have, 10 people all day long listening to calls. So most people end up listening to a very small percentage, and they're using it mostly for training. What we can now do, as we see the cost of transcription services going down, and it will continue to go down significantly over the years. If you think about it, we can then enable a transcript of all those calls, and we can run across the board and pull out summary data. So if I take a specific customer's recordings, oftentimes they say, well, I don't know what my customers are really asking all day. Unless the agent puts it into a CRM or some other database, that information that they're speaking gets locked in, we call dark data, right? It's in a stored recording somewhere, but nobody really ever accesses it and listens to it. Well, the system now has a transcript of that call. We can run a query and say, how many times are customers asking about this product versus that product, or they're dissatisfied with something? You can start extracting and pulling for that data much more effectively. And that's what we're really looking forward to as the transcription rates come down, is if you can transcribe every call, you've now got data about each voice conversation that occurred, and you can start extracting the information that was really asked for most commonly in those calls.
And that could drive development, new product development. Maybe you've come across an opportunity where lots of folks are talking about it, might drive an initiative there, a marketing campaign, a sales outreach. Exactly. Or possibly, a patch somewhere along the line where you're seeing something crop up a lot of times. So you could take that data, mine it, I guess, and then use it in a means to make the business a little more agile.
Exactly. Mining for voice has not been you just can't. Mining for voice itself. So once you convert it to text, you then have the ability to mine on that data and make business decisions that can, change. You can make the proper adjustments and changes to the business based on what the customers are telling you.
Just one last question for you. How does workforce optimization drive efficiencies and productivity?
Yeah, so the WFO suite, if you look across, it consists of a couple things. Workforce optimization, as we refer to it. We acquired a company called Virtual Observer. We also work with Verint, and we actually host the Verint solution in our data centers for those who opt for that. And what it allows, if you look at, there's two sides of it. There's the voice side of recording and quality management of those voice conversations, as we talked about earlier. And then you can do intelligent searches and being able to pull up that data and using speech analytics to determine, good calls from bad calls and effective ones and so forth. That's the QM side. And what you can then there's the workforce management side. And the workforce management tools are very effective. That's where you can use the data that you've had historically to try to staff effectively for the future, right? This is all your staffing and forecasting and scheduling, right? How many agents do I need to have logged in next Tuesday at 2 p.m.? Well, it depends. I may want to look historically. I may want to look at a promotion I just launched that may drive more traffic to my contact center. There's a real art with some science that goes into how to staff effectively. And the mistake is if I overstaff, I'm going to have idle agents and it's going to cost me more. And if I understaff, I'm going to build up big queues where my customer satisfaction goes down. So there's a real challenge in trying to predict the future and be able to appropriately staff for upcoming moments. And that's where the WFO suite really helps folks be more effective and more efficient, and so they can pinpoint that staffing requirement most effectively.
Thank you. We're just coming to the end of the time here, and I'd like to quickly summarize. I'm a bit of a neophyte, actually quite a neophyte, when it comes to this business and technology. So let me take a stab at recapping what we talked about here. And Dan, maybe you could weigh in and confirm I've got this right. So when considering upgrading, expanding, or deploying a contact center, it really boils down to optimizing the customer interaction. And for any inbound caller, emotional laden or otherwise, which I can certainly relate to, having been on some of those calls where I've been frustrated and irate about something and not knowing whether I should be frying an egg or winding my watch, we can optimize that interaction with the caller by using AI and machine learning to firstly match the caller with an appropriate agent, and not just based on his or her technical skills, but also based on personality. Are they assertive or not, empathetic for the situation? Are they okay with learning new nasty words and phrases? And possibly even based on gender. And then secondly, to provide that chosen agent with relevant customer data in real time from big data or the CRM or other software integrations to facilitate that interaction. And then regarding outbound communication, it's about business agility and driving efficiencies through outbound tools such as your intelligent routing and smart dialing and so on. And finally, utilizing call data to proactively drive initiatives to enhance service and sales and so on. Anything I missed, glaring?
You're too humble to call yourself a neophyte. You got it. Well done. So no, you've got this cold, and I think the key there is working with a team of people that are going to operate as a partner to your customers and folks that are out there listening today. Partner with a firm that's going to roll up their sleeves and come in and consult with you and work with you. It's not a product that we deliver. It's really a service, and the products many are capable. There's so much technology available to us today, and we hear this from our customers all the time. It's not, the technology can be delivered. If the technology isn't applied in the way and customized and tailored in the way that works for the business, it doesn't matter what technology you put in, it's not going to be an effective tool. So we pride ourselves on really leveraging our services teams, our professional services teams, to come in, roll up the sleeves, and really say, let's work together on reimagining the customer experience and tailoring some of this technology. All the things we talked about, nobody can go put those in overnight and implement all of them. So there's a strategy there that involves, okay, where's the best opportunity to make the biggest impact, and do them, kind of add them one at a time. And that, therefore, you kind of revamp and reimagine your customer experience piece by piece, as opposed to just doing a big flash cut to something completely different that your customers aren't ready for, nor are your employees or agents ready for it. So we find that consultative approach to really working with our customers and having a very high touch, hands-on engagement is what's worked out very well for our customers long term.
Absolutely, and that's where we can differentiate from the competition for certain.
Yep.
Okay, it's time now for questions from the audience. Suzanne and Joe, could you please field and read the questions for Dan?
Sure, there were a couple that came in. Thanks very much for the discussion. So just in the interest of time, I've got about 7. I'm not going to go through all of those. I'll highlight the top 3. So Dan, one question that came in, it seems like Five9 is making a fairly large investment in Canada. What are the next steps? Will you plan to open a Canadian office or demonstration center here? And if so, where will that be? Also, will there be in-country bilingual pre and post-sale support for English and French Canadian?
Yeah, great question. Several parts to it. First, yeah, we are making a significant investment in the Canadian market. We don't have a formal centralized office. Part of it is we want our resources spread where all of you are, right? In the regions where the customers reside. Our data centers are in Montreal. They're in the GCP, Google Cloud Platform facilities. And if we were to centralize an office and create a demonstration center, it would, most likely, be in the Toronto area, in the greater area, just because we find most businesses have access to that, even if they're remote. But we've had several of our early adopters, years and years ago, up in Montreal, and I've spent some time there personally working with those customers. So it really does run the gamut. As far as the language support, yeah, French Canadian was the first language after Spanish. We did English, Spanish first, and then French Canadian was our third because of the Canadian presence and interest by some key customers there. But we will continue to invest. We see Canada, the North America market, as we refer to it. We even bring the US and Canada kind of together in our understanding of building out our sales and services teams to cover the Canadian market. So very much part of our future and very much part of the opportunity we see going forward.
Okay, terrific. And then one has just come in now. I'll read that out. Data sovereignty is important in Canada, and I think you've addressed this, Dan, with the data center presence in Montreal. But how does Five9 comply with our Canadian privacy laws with respect to that?
Yeah, so we have full encryption at rest and in transit for all the data. We also have, for PCI compliance, we make sure that we do not record any credit card or payment card information. So we're compliant with those regulations to ensure that we don't have any recording. Now, there are customers that need to take the steps to make sure that they incorporate that technology to do so. And we have a variety of different solutions for payment card industry compliance. Some of them even go to the extreme where they want to err on the side of, I don't even want my agents to hear the credit card being read. So we conference in an IVR that prompts the caller to input their credit card, their expiration date, and the security code, and then they block the agent from hearing that part of the conversation. It collects it, it enters it into the CRM, masks it from the agent, The agent gets brought back onto the call, and the agent has no idea what that credit card even was. And that's something that, that's on one extreme. And on the other extreme, you have folks that say, well, my agents can hear it. I just want to make sure it's not recorded. And so it gets paused and resumed based on where the agent puts their cursor on the screen. If they go into the field for credit card, it pauses recording. And then when they leave that field, it resumes. The reason I give both examples is in some cases, we started with the latter, the one where the agent would still hear the information. And what was discovered was there were outsourcers that had, people taking calls all over the world that, somebody could remember that last credit card they took for the day, walk out the door, write it on their hand, and then go sell it to somebody down the road months later. And there'd be no way to track where that card got leaked from. And this is a great way of, hey, we won't even let the agents hear the information. So we've taken quite extensive measures to make sure our clients, and some of them are extremely demanding, some of the largest, we have some Fortune 10 customers and lots of Global 2000 customers that want to make sure that we not only adhere to the regulation, but that we take it a step further and help them adhere to their standards. So across Canada, we recognize there's lots of data sovereignty, making sure that the other is healthcare. For us in the US, it's HIPAA, but we've got regulations that in Canada, we got to make sure that health information isn't exposed to parties that aren't able to have access or be able to disclose that information. So security is very, very important. Data protection for our clients is very, very important. And we adhere to it across the spectrum. Every country has their own operating procedures and regulations, and we make sure that we adhere to those and stay abreast of what those are as they come down the pipe.
Okay, super. If we've got time for two more, then I'll do this quickly. Our customers reach out to our support teams in various ways, from social media to email to web chat, but if all the communication lines are disconnected, it can create unnecessary confusion, frustration for our customers and our staff. How does Five9 ensure communication reliability?
Yeah, so that's a great one. Years and years ago, we operated in a simplex mode into one data center. And if the inbound, telephony circuits that terminated into our data center, you could have a point of failure, even though we've got full redundant stacks within that particular data center. We've now built our data centers to be geographically distributed and for the databases to stay in sync across those, so that if we bring traffic into one data center and there's a hiccup or an issue within that data center that doesn't allow the transaction to occur, we can do what's called geo redundancy, which is a GR we manually revert. It doesn't occur automatically, because if you think about it, there's one voice path. And if I'm on that voice path and something occurs during that call, there is a chance that voice path could go down. But if I'm located on a server that has the issue, but if I flip the switch to the geographic redundancy, that very next call will terminate into the backup data center with all the same data and relevant information fully integrated to the CRM, and take those calls moving forward. We also have an ability to do what we call graceful GR, where we can move the traffic from one data center to another while it's operating. So as each call completes at one data center, that agent will then be automatically logged into the alternative or the backup, and the calls will start migrating to the backup center as well. So we can do kind of a load balance during that migration that's invisible to your consumers and still gives you that reliability that we stand for. Our name is Five9. It stands for 5 nines of reliability, carrier grade. So 99.999% reliability means 4 minutes of downtime a year, and we're moving towards that. We achieve that in most months. We are the most reliable cloud contact center in the market, and we can achieve, and many of our customers will share this, we can achieve greater reliability because of our data center management 24/7 and all the tools and monitoring and network facilities that we have in place. Far greater reliability than companies can achieve on their own. trying to manage, servers and multiple locations and doing that. It's what we do for a living. Managing this infrastructure for you can be far more reliable than trying to manage it yourselves.
Oh, super. I think that addresses the question here too. One came in from a customer. Is there a plan to synergize the features and functionality to the other, data centers across the country to mirror the U.S. model? I think you've answered that, right? The question being, would there be a geographic, redundancy built in and amongst the DCs across the global footprint? So I think you've addressed that well. And then the last question is, what's your prediction for the contact center in the next 5 years and the evolution of where we're going?
Gosh, I love that question. Rowan Trollope, who is our CEO, who, by the way, his heart is in Canada. He grew up in Canada and is a Canadian and is very proud of that. So I told him I was doing this today, and he was like, "Oh, put in the good word and say hi to my fellow Canadians." So when you look at the prediction, the reason I bring up Rowan, not just for that, but he made a prediction about 3 years ago when he came to Five9, and it was that the contact center would change more in the next 5 years than it had in the previous 25 combined. And I have to say firsthand, having been in this space my whole career, it couldn't be more of the truth. I mean, we are seeing that firsthand right now. If you think about those technologies and those automations and the solutions that we're describing, if I looked back, from 5 years ago to 25 years ago, it was, you'd get a little better routing, you get a little better, the IVRs would get a little better. It's completely changing. And now what we're finding is we're still in that early adopter phase of the automation solutions. But as those become mainstream, to answer your question, I think we're going to have a complete transformation of how consumers interact with businesses and brands. And it's going to involve, the contact center I don't even think it'll be considered or called a contact center. I think it'll be more of customer experience. It'll just be based around the experience that we deliver. And the experience is delivered from something that's not really called a contact center anymore because it's so highly distributed and crosses so many technologies.
Terrific.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Suzanne. Before a final thank you to the audience, I'd like to say that it is not often we get a chance to attract a president of a 13 billion US company to a private event without having to commit a boatload of purchase orders, which in my opinion speaks to your character, Dan, and certainly the culture at Five9. So Dan, thank you so much for sharing your views today with us, and we very much appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope this was a useful session, and I'm absolutely accessible for whatever follow-up if you or any of the customers want to inquire further. We've got a whole team at your ready.
Thank you. In closing, thank you all very much for joining us today. We know you are busy and have other options for your time, so we very much appreciate you participating today. We will reach out to you in the coming week to address any further questions or some of the questions we didn't get a chance to answer. And on behalf of all of us at Unity and Five9, we wish you and your families all the best for good health. Be well. Cheers.